everyone listening, if they were to go and listen to their top 10 favorite modern records, I guarantee you are not going to hear out-of-time drums. You're not going to hear out-of-tune guitars. You're not going to hear mistakes. Things are done properly. Probably the turning point, it was when I got serious about solving performance problems and at the tracking stage, not accepting something that didn't sound right. Just keep going until we get it as good as it can possibly be.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to meet with recording professionals, to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today for this bonus episode on the podcast is Jordan Valeriote, who's also been a previous guest in episode 60. Jordan is an independent producer, mixer, and engineer based out of Ontario, Canada, specializing in hardcore music. Jordan has fast-tracked his decade-plus career from studio assistant working with bands like Usher, Timbaland, Serena, Ryder, and the Jonas Brothers to successful major label producer for bands like Silverstein, Antimacy, The Dead and Divine, and Prophets for the Counterparts, to name just a few of the many bands he's worked with. Jordan is also an educator and the founder of Hardcore Music Studio, helping to transform students around the world from home studio hobbyists to top-tier rock and heavy music producers. He's helped thousands of music producers learn how to produce powerful rock records and build successful careers from their music studios. In this episode, Jordan is going to show us how to go from charging $100 to $1,000 a song as a full-stack producer while understanding the 4 key ingredients for how to capture raw tracks in your studio that sound better than most people's final mixes. So whether you've been wanting to take your studio from hobby to pro, or just make sure that your records sound like a pro, then you're going to love this episode, especially if you want to rock. And as a heads up, rock stars, everything that Jordan and I are going to talk about on this podcast, he has got a free download for you at rsrockstars.com/fullstack. That link will be in the show notes so you can go get his free video series. So please welcome Jordan Valeriote back to Recording Studio Rockstars. Jordan, are you ready to rock and to make sure that we do too?
I am so ready, man.
It's great to have you back on the show, man. It's been way too long since we've had you here.
I know it feels like it's been years. Yeah, I'm super happy to be back and appreciate those kind words in the intro for sure.
Sure, man. Well, one of the things that's exciting about taking a while between your last episode and now is to see this incredible stuff that you've created. And your ability to teach music producers all over the world how to make better rock records. And so I thought I'd start out by just giving you a chance to kind of introduce yourself a little bit and tell us, what is Hardcore Music Studio? What is your goal and what do you enjoy about teaching?
Yeah, so the simple goal of Hardcore Music Studio is just to help rock and metal engineers and producers make better sounding records. And really just, I've been on the same journey as everyone else. Actually, it's really funny. Right before this, I was digging back at my old catalog of backed up projects. And I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've got like a binder full of DVDs that I used to have to burn, right? To back stuff up.
Mine are all in the basement.
Yeah. So I'm pulling that out and I'm like listening to stuff I did, back when I was just starting out, 2005, 2006. And it's just so bad. And so I've been on that journey, of just, I really want to do this. And then everything I do sounds horrible. What am I doing wrong? And then just going through all the muck and the journey and the hard work of figuring it out. And then finally, seeing a little bit of success. So I just wanted to create Hardcore Music Studio to help people fast track that a little bit, because there were a few times along my journey where I got to talk to a pro who was way ahead of me, and they would just share a few tips or they'd answer some of my questions. And then it was almost just like, boom, I just skipped like 2 years of trial and error.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that that's kind of my goal with the courses and the content I create is I'm trying to help people skip all of that pain. I mean, I'm not trying to pretend that you can overnight become, a world-class producer or mixer. It does take time. You got to put in the reps, but there's no sense doing the wrong things for years, when you could literally just be pointed in the right direction and get there so much quicker.
Yeah. So that reminds me of, moving to Nashville for somebody like me. it put me in the vicinity and in the studio sometimes, not all the time, but occasionally when the time happened, with producers that had that experience. And exactly as you said, it's just like I would just take leaps and bounds by watching them do something a certain way or seeing how they interacted with the bands and musicians. And it's very cool now with the internet and with this podcast, for example, and with what you created at Hardcore Music Studio, that you don't have to live in the right city. You can be anywhere, but you can still get that teaching.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's huge, because I had a similar experience to you, Lidge. I didn't move to Nashville or LA or anything, but I was near Toronto and I got to assist at a big studio in Toronto. And yeah, just being in that environment, it sped things up and like so much for me and answered so many questions. And but the thing is that was tough. I was commuting like 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was working like ridiculous hours. I had no life. It was really hard. Cleaned a lot of toilets, did all the typical intern stuff. And now you can get almost the same quality of education and kind of hands-on, over-the-shoulder experience while watching at home, which I think is pretty amazing.
Plus, back then you needed to go to a studio to even have the tools. And now those tools and the technology have evolved so much that you can have the very same tools to make a pro record right from a home studio.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing just to see how far it's come, even in just my short time, about 15 years being in this.
Well, very cool. Well, so what's some of the stuff that you're excited about right now?
So right now, we're getting ready to open up enrollment for my pro production system, which it's a full solution to teach you everything from tracking, editing, to mixing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I really wanted to provide a one-stop shop so that people are not cobbling together advice from all these different sources and not sure what works and what doesn't. It's literally just a formula where if you go through the whole thing and put it into practice, you will be able to go into the studio, track a band, mix it, and leave with the finished product that sounds, up to pro caliber.
That's awesome. Yeah, I suppose if we wanted to be a cobbler, we'd learn how to make shoes, right?
Sure.
Well, very cool. Well, you have some really great topics that you like to cover. And one of them is you talk about having helped music producers go from charging very little for music that they're working on and some of the struggles that people go through with that to actually making a cool living, something that feels very transformative. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and talk about some of the things that you've seen with students who start out in one place and, what's possible?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love hearing these stories, and we've got a bunch of them. But there's a student named Sam who bought my course back in 2015, and he's now producing some of the biggest names in the Canadian heavy music scene, charging $1,000 plus per song. We've got a guy named RJ in New York who told me he went from $100 a song to $600 a song in I think less than a year, recording and mixing bands locally. So yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is it's possible to get paid pretty well as a recording engineer and home studio owner and producer. None of these guys are working out of amazing, world-class studios or anything. Most of them are just at home or in very small project studios. So it is possible. But I think the big thing is that you need to, if that's where you want to be, or if you're recording your own music and releasing your own music and you want it to get up to that pro caliber, you need to stop being just an engineer. I think that a lot of people approach this as just it's my job to turn the knobs and use the plugins and plug in the mic and record the tracks into the DAW, and then everything else is up to the band, and so the quality they get is completely dependent on whether or not they're tracking a good band or not. And that I find that that's the thing that keeps so many people stuck.
Yeah. I have always found that the more I interact and offer, much more than just button pushing when I work with people, often it's really well received. And one of the things I might do is just simply ask people, just be humble about it. Just say, hey, would you like to have an opinion on something? And then you kind of find your way into the equation that way. What are some things that you suggest for people to do more than just the engineering? How do you suggest that music producers actually get there?
Yeah, so I'm going to go even very far kind of in the extreme here. And I would say this is for people who do want to get paid to record and mix. They do want to have clients. and they want to have a steady stream of clients, maybe even go full time. The people that get paid the most and the people who kind of reach the top in whatever music scene they're in, they get paid the most because they can achieve a certain result every single time, no matter what.
Yeah.
So every single band, every single client that comes to them, no matter how new or experienced they are, the finished record at the end sounds top notch every single time. Like no excuses. It's never necessarily a matter of like, oh, well, the drummer couldn't play to a click track, so therefore this record doesn't sound good. That just, they do not allow that to happen. They have the standard set very high, and they know how to solve problems in order to always hit that standard. I think that is really the differentiating factor.
So it's making sure that there's never any excuse. In other words, it's like, if there's something that needs to happen to this record to get it up to the standard that's going to make it stand out, you got to get it there.
Exactly. Yeah. No excuses, no blaming the band or just kind of washing your hands and saying, oh, well, I did the best I could, and, they weren't prepared. So too bad, because.
All right. Well, let me ask some questions. The first questions that come to mind for me would be like, okay, but I mean, like, so you got a band, they come in, maybe they got some cool ideas, maybe they got some great energy, but maybe they think that they're performing better than they really are performing. Or, a typical engineer statement might be like, yeah, that drummer, Yeah. And then also, like, what about, things like guitar tones? I mean, obviously, if you're going to do heavy music, it's key. I mean, don't you have to have, some of the guitar amps I've seen in the studio can be many thousands of dollars. So what are some things around those limitations that we need to be aware of?
Yeah. So I think, to your point earlier, like the tools that we have available today make everything accessible to everyone, to be honest. I mean, in terms of, a lot of people in this genre especially are programming their drums, which, I don't love. I'm not saying I would much rather record and mix a real drum kit for sure. But you can still get in very, very much top quality mixes that almost sound like a real drummer played it if you're programming drums the right way. So that kind of takes away the excuse of even, the drummer's bad, or I can't even record drums in my space or whatever. There's always drum samples you could use to help a drummer who's not maybe hitting consistently or hitting hard enough. And in terms of guitar amps, I mean, legit, at my studio, my project studio that I used to have when I was tracking bands all the time, I had 2 guitar amps, JCM 800, and that covered everything that was like indie rock, pop punk, pop rock, just kind of straight up rock stuff. And I had a 5150, which I got used for like $600, and that covered everything that was heavier, all the metal stuff. Just those 2 amps, and I literally recorded probably 500, 600 songs just with those.
Nice.
So I think, it definitely takes being aware of what kind of sound you're going for and getting the right tools for that. But where I was going with that is having those 2 amps, I've now started playing around with some amp simulator plugins like from Neural DSP. The Nolly Archetype pack has 4 amps in it, but two of them are the JCM 800 and the 5150. And man, I went and I was A/Bing that with some of the records that I made with those actual amps in the studio, and it's like it's right there, man. Like I would be just as happy to use those plugins now. So I think that anyone has access to these tools to be able to get these pro caliber sounds.
I recently got a hold of Line 6 Helix, the plugin version, and I could not believe how good those guitar sounds are. In fact, we used them for a ton of overdubs on a production recently, and it just blew me away because, like I was hinting at, you have this sense that you need some, vast collection of expensive amps that need to be maintained. But if you know how to use the new tools, amp simulators, for example, you can really get great sounding stuff that way.
Yeah, totally. I just mixed a song that was tracked with the Helix as well, and I was really impressed. I absolutely love the tone. It's getting basically on par. I mean, to me, there's not really a difference at the end of the day.
Very cool. All right, so there are tricks that you can do to edit your drums. There's anything you want to say about actually using a real drummer, but also integrating with samples in a clever way that gives it that the kind of sound you're looking for, but it's not really programmed?
Yeah, for sure. So I definitely first want to kind of clear something up. Like, just because these tools like programming drums and amp sims, just because they exist, I still don't think that it's enough. If you want to succeed and get paid as a producer and engineer, I don't think it's enough to just learn how to use those tools and to master those tools in isolation. I think you need to use those in the context of also learning. I just call it real world engineering, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you want to get good sounding program drums or amp simulators, well, the thing that's going to allow you to achieve those sounds in the box with these digital tools is actually having experience in the real world too. Like, if you've actually mic'd up real drum kits, recorded real drummers, edited real drums, same thing with guitars, then you're going to know what to do in the box with these digital tools to be able to achieve the same sound, right? I find that that's the big thing is if all you can do is program MIDI drums and use amp sims, while you're kind of pigeonholing yourself, is be pretty hard to build a sustainable career, because as soon as someone wants to do something other than that, you're kind of sunk, right? So
right. And
it's a little, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, the more you, as you're saying, the more you learn, for me, I think about what a drummer does out there. Sometimes drummers don't do the right parts, but a lot of times they do the right parts. You know what I mean? And it's like you as you learn to record the drums really well and produce drummers in the studio, you also learn how to let that be the roadmap for how you can use these other tools like the drum samples and really get the kind of sounds you're looking for.
Yes. Yeah. Completely agree. I mean, how are you supposed to make digital drums sound real if you've never had experience recording a real drum kit, right? You have no frame of reference.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the samples, so I have no problem with using samples. I know people like to debate it a little bit. I think it's a little silly, but I have no problem using them. But the favorite records I've ever done were the ones where I got great sounds out of the live kit and the drummer, and I'm just using samples to enhance rather than replace.
Mm-hmm.
And it's to your point earlier, and when we're talking about doing what it takes to get up to that pro standard, depending on who you're working with, that might require a lot of heavy lifting. It might require that I completely replace the kick and snare sample just because he's not tight enough, not hitting consistently enough. It's just a mess. I replace that because I'm not going to let something be below that standard. Or it can be a fantastic drummer with great kit and everything, and he's hitting perfectly. And I might use 80% of the live kit sound and just tuck in some samples to kind of just give it a little more beef and size in the mix, or help it cut through, whatever the problem is. It's all just problem solving, I think. So I definitely don't want people to think he's just talking about faking everything and, that's the way to make a good sounding record. I don't think that at all. These are just tools to solve problems. Yeah,
but I mean, at the same time, one of the things that really strikes me is when I go listen to music that you've produced or some of the examples of students that you've taught, and I hear the transformation, you just have such a great way of fitting in those modern elements, drum samples, mixing techniques, amp simulators, so that the final result just sounds awesome. And I'm not even thinking about whether it's a real drum or a fake drum or whatever. I don't even care at that point. I'm totally glued into how the song just fits together really well.
Yeah, I love that you said that. That's our job, right? It's like the moment that your production or the production quality or whatever it is, or your snare sound or something, the moment that becomes a distraction to the listener, then you've kind of failed. You haven't really done your job, right?
Yeah. And I mean, now, so, as I mentioned, you do a lot of hardcore music, heavy rock, metal, and that's not as much of a typical genre that I work in. But one of the things that I really appreciate in the studio as a producer and an engineer, and I think a lot of the rock stars out there feel this way too, is you learn to have an appreciation for wanting to know how to approach every style of music. Even if I'm not doing a lot of metal bands, there are plenty of times where I'm like, man, how do I get that sound? This one chorus in this song could really use that kind of approach. So I find it really fascinating to always learn these different styles of production. Yeah. So you have, you talked about, and maybe I cheated a little bit and started getting you to answer this, but you talked about the 4 key ingredients to capturing raw tracks that sound better than your final mixes might right now. So I wonder if you wanted to jump into that topic and kind of hit us with those ideas.
Yes, I will definitely dive into those 4 ingredients. So first, I think I'll just tell a quick story. When I was assisting, it kind of sets this up. I was assisting in Toronto at that studio I talked about, and the Jonas brothers were in with their producer, John Fields. Amazing guy, amazing producer.
Yeah, great guy. Also a guest on the podcast with you.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, he's I learned so much just being a fly on the wall for those sessions. But I watched them track, about half of a record that ended up going platinum. And he's producing, they're tracking drums, bass, guitar, everything. They're throwing songs together in a day. It sounds amazing. And I was just blown away by how fast he worked and everything like that. But fast forward, this record ends up getting mixed by Chris Lord-Alge, who's one of my favorite mixers, of course. So I had kind of this privilege of being able to be in this tracking room while these songs were put together from the ground up. So I heard the raw tracks, I heard what it sounded like off the board, and then I got to go and hear CLA's mix. So when I buy the CD, I'm thinking, all right, well, everyone says that CLA's is just kind of like a stamp mix factory. He's just going to replace everything with his sounds and his samples, and then just crank it out. So I'm expecting a huge transformation from what I heard in the tracking studio. But I popped that album in, and it's like, wait a second, those drums sound like the same as I heard in the studio, and the guitar tones are exactly the same, and it sounds like maybe 20% better. Like it sounds like the same tracks, just a little more exciting, a little more punch, clarity, energy. And at that experience, man, just completely turned my world upside down, because what I was doing at the time, which is what I think a lot of aspiring engineers are doing, is they're just kind of fumbling their way through the tracking process, trying to get it over with as quickly as possible. And then when it comes to mix time and the client goes home and you're just by yourself, well, that's when you start digging in and trying to change and reinvent everything and replace all your sounds and reamp and whatnot, and completely transforming the tracks to try and come up with some good sounding mix. And then this just totally turned that upside down, because I was like, wait a second, this sounds like what the record sounded like in the studio. And so I went on this journey of trying to get it right at the source and being like, well, this is how they're working at the platinum level. This is how I should be working too. So that really changed everything. So yeah, like you said, there are 4 key ingredients to being able to capture raw tracks that sound better than your final mixes might sound. Right now, that certainly was the case for me. And I really think that your raw tracks, kind of at the end of a tracking session, what's coming out of the speakers, it should be exciting. It should sound like 80% like a finished mix. And that's
actually, even a thing that Chris Lord-Alge has said before. He's like, if you're in a tracking session, never hand over a rough mix unless you've done everything you can to make it sound like a final mix before you even give it to them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then if you're handing it off to a mixer, they're going to do a better job that way, because they're not just fumbling in the dark trying to guess what you want. But also if you're mixing it yourself, mixing actually becomes fun and creative and not just an exercise in trying to fix a bunch of problems, right? So,
yeah, and you talked about that 20%, and that's one of the things that's such a thrill when you learn how to get that 20% in mixing. I mean, like, while your story might be indicating that 80% of it is the tracking, let's not kid ourselves. That is a valuable 20% at the same time. So like,
absolutely.
And with your idea of the full stack producer, having that knowledge to be able to capture the tracks so that you get that far and then still put that 20% icing on is pretty cool. It's a good feeling,
Yes. Absolutely. And I find that they go hand in hand, because the better you get at mixing, you're kind of training your ear the whole time to be like, oh, this is what my drums need to sound like in the final mix, or this is what a final guitar tone sounds like in a good mix. Therefore, when you're in your next tracking session, you kind of have that benchmark more in your mind. So the more you go on, it kind of feeds into each other, right?
Yeah. You're training your ear. And it's funny how training your ear as you go through this process and learn this stuff, it's not the ear that you see on the side of your head, it's inside. It's the way your brain is processing this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, groovy.
So yeah, let's dive into the 4 ingredients. So the first ingredient to capturing great raw tracks and source tones that work in a final mix is to actually get good at knowing the instruments themselves. So when you're tracking, it's not enough just to be the engineer who knows how to plug in the mics and work the console and the DAW. I'm talking about choosing the right sizes of drums, tuning the drums, replacing drum heads, replacing guitar strings, choosing the right string gauges for different tunings that bands are using, choosing the right amps to get the sounds that you're going for, like we talked about before, setting intonation on guitars, because let's face it, a lot of young bands that we're working with, they probably don't know how to do any of that. Right?
All of them.
Yeah, they don't know how to do that. That's what I found. So I just like, man, I got to figure this out on my own, because I can't rely on the band to intonate their guitar or tune the drums. And we've got to remember that after the actual player themselves, I mean, the instrument is the next most important thing, right? It doesn't matter what mic or preamp you're using. if you're trying to capture like a modern metal tone using a Vox AC30. It's just you're not going to get there, right? So,
well, see, here's what's so great about it. I didn't know that until just now, so thank you. So you're already teaching me.
But I'm sure you've got so much experience to I'm sure you'd agree, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, when I think about it, yeah, but I'd probably also look at the Vox AC30 and be like, ooh, that's a great amp, Yeah. But point taken, like, as you learn these things, then you start hitting the studio with the right answers, a lot more right answers when you hit the studio instead of 50% right answers and 50% wrong ones.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've got a guitar player who's playing really hard and maybe he's using a lower tuning, but he's using super light strings, well, the tuning and the intonation is going to be all messed up. So then it doesn't matter what amp you have either, right?
Yeah,
it's all coming down to getting the instrument right first. So that's the first thing. I think you've really got to learn those skills. And it's not that hard to learn the basics. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at tuning drums, but I figured out how to tune the kick and the snare and the toms where I could use the same approach for pretty much almost every genre, at least within the rock realm, and be able to get the sound like a competitive pro modern drum sound. And that's all you need. You just need fast go-to strategies for the instruments themselves. So that's the first key. And the second one is moving on to the engineering gear. So it's having really just fast go-to miking strategies that work. So can you mic a drum kit? Can you mic a guitar amp, quickly every single time and kind of know what technique, where to put the mic and what's going to work, and not experimenting every time. And what I used to do when I was just starting out, what I think a lot of people do is every single time they're recording drums or guitar amp, they're questioning, well, should I use the XY overhead? Should I do a space pair? Should I try something different? Should I try both? Should I try 4 mics on the guitar cab? Because I'm not really sure which one's going to give me the sound that I want. So really actually just taking the time to learn from someone, here's a setup of miking a rock drum kit. This is going to give you the results. Sure, you can try other stuff, but as a starting point, as a go-to strategy, this is going to work. This is going to get you this type of sound, and being able to just do that quickly and commit to that, which, by the way, is number 3. The third key is
okay. All right, we're ready for it. We're ready.
Yeah, to commit. Sorry, I know I'm going fast on that one, but to commit to sounds that will work in the final mix. So again, not waiting till later, not capturing 5 different backup tones on the guitar or 5 mics on the snare because you're not sure which one's going to work best. Just getting the sound right at the source during tracking. And if it's not right, if the tone doesn't sound good, then you don't move on until you fix it and it sounds good. Then you track, right? Not waiting later to fix it in the mix and getting up to that, trying to hit that 80% bar that we talked about. So those are the first 3: getting good at knowing the instruments, having fast go-to miking strategies that work, and committing to sounds that you are confident are going to work in the final mix. So is that all making sense? Any questions on that?
No. This is all great stuff. And I'm thinking about examples of all these things. Like the many times you can move forward with drums and only find out later that the drums aren't doing what you wish they would, when you get to the mix. And that can be, I've had situations where, like I hinted at before, it might have been the drummer not being prepared for the session. It might have been the drum kit. Maybe we just didn't know what a good drum kit sounded like, and we just used the one that we had, And it could be the heads on the drums. It could be like, maybe we just thought, well, the drums are ready to go, not realizing that if we had chosen the right drum heads and actually, tuned the drums and put new heads on before a session, it would have made a huge difference. Or cymbals, there's so many. I know you talked about it like you can learn these things, but man, when you're starting out, there are so many, you're just like pulling your hair out. Everything's a question mark. So when you get a chance to have somebody just say, hey, here's a starting place, get this kind of, I remember the first time some engineers said to me, they're like, oh, snare drum, it's a ambassador on top and a diplomat on the bottom. And I was like, I thought it was a sex joke. I was like, wait, what is that? And so, but it was like mind blowing, because then all of a sudden I began to realize, like you're saying, you begin to learn some of these starting go-to points and all the guitar stuff and intonating and everything. And then also, like you said, the fast mic strategies. Now I know I'm talking fast here. So the fast mic strategies, it's so great to just know, look, here's a starting place. Use this. This is a go-to technique that's going to work for you most of the time, so you don't waste time looking at stuff. And I'm a little guilty of that here on the podcast because I have there's so many guests with so many suggestions for things to try, but that's not necessarily going to get you to the finish line quickly if you need something that you can use as a go-to starting place to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to, make sure, depending on where you are and your skills and your journey, like, got to make sure you're not jumping way ahead to like trying to figure out how to multi-mic a guitar cab before you know how to just put an SM57 in the right spot and get a usable sound, right?
Yeah.
But the good news is I don't think it's as hard as people make it out, because I think it's often way overcomplicated. When we look at online forums and message boards and stuff, and maybe certain YouTube channels, it's just, they make everything so complicated, all these steps and all these different complicated things that you have to do. And you just don't have to. And like you said, just having someone to tell you, oh, these drum heads will work good. Or, hey, if you're doing fast, complicated metal stuff, like use smaller crashes, maybe 16-inch crashes. Like if the drummer's got, a 21-inch big crash, it's going to sound probably too loud and washy, and you're not going to get that definition in the mix. So rent some smaller cymbals. Just things like that. Like as you accumulate those little tidbits and starting points, things just get so much easier. And then once you get that down, then of course, like experiment. But I think, just having those go-to strategies that are going to work, that have been proven through the years, that other pros have been using for, countless amount of time on countless amount of records, right?
Yeah, or like, in your experience, like, so you've started out where you didn't know what to use on records, but now you've got the experience where you've seen a record through all the way to the end, and you know what the end result is that works, and you can sort of reverse engineer it back to the source elements that you use to get there, which is great. And your third point about committing to sounds for the mix, that's so critical, because that applies to everything, even a vocal. It's like, when we start out, sometimes we just think, oh, you just stand on the vocal mic and you get a vocal sound, and now you sing all your parts. And then you begin to learn, step back 3 feet from the vocal mic for this particular overdub, turn your head. There's all these things that you can learn that really help make it all blend together if you really have that get it right now for the mix attitude. Absolutely.
And I also extend that to the performance as well. When it comes to vocals, I'm not one to, record 6 takes of the course and then try to comp it together later. Maybe the odd time you have to do that, but generally I like to work fast. And if we're recording a line of a chorus or a verse, like we work on that line, and when it feels right and good, we move on to the next one. And I don't get a bunch of backups just in case. Like it's just, this is the vocal, right? And we commit and move fast.
You know what happens to those backups? You have to revisit them later, and it takes a long time.
Exactly. I tried working like that for a while, and I hated it. It took so long, and I felt like I didn't get a good result, because instead of actually knowing in my head, okay, this is what this take needs to sound like, and waiting till I got there, I just got 5 takes thinking in my head, well, I've got 5, so some combination is got to work, right?
Yeah. And 5's a lot easier than 150, I'll tell you that too.
Oh, geez. I would not want to touch that.
Yeah. Well, okay, groovy. So we got 3. So then we're moving on to the 4th key ingredient.
So the 4th key ingredient, this might be the most important, and it's to be able to solve performance problems. Like solving those problems. I think this is key, and we've already touched on it, but being able to achieve that pro caliber, even if musicians are struggling to play well enough. And everyone listening, like if they were to go and listen to their top 10 favorite modern records, like I guarantee you are not going to hear out of time drums. You're not going to hear out of tune guitars. You're not going to hear mistakes. You're not going to hear out of key vocals. Like things are done properly and they're tracked tight. And that's why it sounds so professional. That's why it's nice to listen to and not distracting. And honestly, like just because all of those favorite records of yours, they all sound that good, that doesn't mean that the musicians underneath are necessarily always actually playing it that well. So I think that is the key, because imagine, let's say you got a chance to record a band for a major label and it's a huge project for you, and it's a new signing that they have, and it's a young band and they're not that experienced, and they come in and it's just a huge letdown. Like they can barely keep on time. The drummer sucks, the guitar players, like everything's out of tune, like you can't play on time. The vocalist is out of key, all that stuff. And you just you don't have the tools or skills or the willingness to step in and take the time and figure out how to solve those problems. Well, imagine you turn the record into the label and you're just like, you know what, guys, sorry, like you sent me this band and they can't really play that well. So that's why the record sucks. So sorry,
Yeah.
That they're never going to call you again. Like you're pretty much done at that point as far as that label is concerned, right? Like they're paying the top guys to get the result no matter what and to protect the investment they're making in the band, right? So I think that's all of these things matter. But if I could pick one that was probably the turning point, it was when I got serious about solving performance problems and not accepting something that was, again, at the tracking stage, not accepting something that didn't sound right, that wasn't tight, that wasn't in tune, and not thinking I was going to fix all that stuff later. Like just keep going until we get it as good as it can possibly be.
And that can be a lot of pressure too, because I mean, as an engineer, producer in a studio situation, you might feel like, well, here we are, whatever is coming out of the speakers, that's what I get. And I think we can fool ourselves too before we learn to recognize how and where we should be able to make the changes that you're talking about. We can fool ourselves. It's like when I've driven a car and like the passenger side door doesn't work, and I'll drive it like that for 6 years and just kind of block it out and ignore it.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that when you're making records in the studio. You want to learn how to identify the stuff that really does need to be fixed and be able to do something about it. But how do we do all that? Where do we get all this knowledge of all this stuff? What's a good place to start for us?
Yeah, so I think, like we've been coming back to, it's learning from someone who's been there and done that, because otherwise you're just on your own, trial and error, and not really knowing how to fix these problems. And that's why, as part of my pro production system, you actually can watch me track a real band from start to finish. And there are problems. There are parts where the guitar player can't play it tight enough. So we split it into smaller sections. So how do you do that without making it sound like, a robotic guitar part and stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I show how to, what I have a whole guides on like what mics you should be using for what as a starting point, go-to strategies that are going to work. Same with drum sizes, cymbal sizes, guitar string gauges, all that stuff. And there's just all the tricks that I know and all the techniques that I know to overcome these problems. They're all documented here for people to watch. So that way you can be in that situation where, let's say the guitar player is, they're playing a chorus and the first chord sounds great, but when he moves to the second one, it's all out of tune. Well, how do you solve that problem? Well, that's all of those scenarios are, documented and on video for people to see in this program, so that they can have that tool belt and that arsenal to solve all these problems.
That's awesome. And one of the challenges too is at the beginning you don't even know to look to the second chord and realize that it was out of tune. Like you may not notice that bass strings are ringing over each other and all that kind of stuff, or that drum sustains are killing the next part of the groove. There's all these things. So that's awesome that you've laid all that stuff out to teach that, because once you see it, you begin to recognize it and understand it.
Yeah, I think once you can look over the shoulder or be on the fly on the wall for an actual pro tracking and mixing session, you just see things. You just pick up on things, and it just changes the way you perceive everything that you're doing. And I remember I had to, again, figure a lot of this out by trial and error or translating like text and emails. I remember back, I think 2008 or 9 or something, I was on the Gear Sluts forum and I found one of my favorite producers on there, and I started private messaging him and was kind of asking him questions, and he would just make these statements like, oh yeah, this record, it took us, 12-hour days to get like 1 or 2 songs done on rhythm guitar.
Right.
And
you're like, what?
I'm thinking, what? Like, I'll do a whole album of rhythm guitar in like an afternoon. So
right.
I kind of asked him about that, and he's like, well, yeah, tuning's a headache, intonation was hard on this guitar, so we had to split up these chords, we had to do these notes like, or these riffs kind of 4 bars at a time. Like he's just saying these things in words. So I'm hearing that, and then I go back and listen to his record, and I'm like, oh yeah, like it sounds really perfect. And so then I'm listening to my own stuff. But yeah, just like you said, it's almost like just putting on a new pair of glasses, because then the next time I'm tracking guitar for someone, all of a sudden I'm hearing all of these issues.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, well, he's taking this much time to do it. Like, obviously there's a process here that I don't know about. I got to figure this out.
Now, it sounds like, the things we've described, these 4 key ingredients: knowing your instruments, whether it's drums, guitars, bass, vocals, keyboards, all these different miking strategies, ways to commit to the sounds in your mix, and then, the no excuses aspect of being able to solve all these performance problems. That sounds like a lot of stuff. So have you, like when you teach this stuff, have you been able to sort of break it down into step by step for us in any way? Because I know, for example, during 2020, I decided if I'm going to be, locked at home in my studio a lot, I'm going to, maybe I'll get some more exercise. And I signed up for an online exercise program. And it really helped that it was just broken down into like, here's what you do Monday, here's what you do Tuesday, that kind of thing. And then at the end of the year, now I'm, somebody comments and they're like, hey man, you're looking pretty fit. So
awesome.
So the step-by-step thing, I'm just saying like that breaking it down for us is super helpful.
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to actually learning this stuff, like I said, the Pro Production System it's everything: mixing, editing, and tracking. And for people when they join, I'm actually going to be taking everyone through in a specific order. So I actually think that starting with mixing is kind of key, because like we talked about before, it starts to train your ear towards what good sounds and tones should be like. It's also something that everyone can jump into right away. Like maybe you don't have a tracking project coming up or anything, and so that's not immediately applicable. So we start with mixing and instantly get your mixes sounding way better in a short amount of time. And
awesome.
So it's kind of within each of the steps of tracking, editing, and mixing. Yeah, there are steps within that, right? So it's all just like, there's kind of like a overarching steps of learning mixing, then learning editing, then taking all of that into tracking. But then within each of those, there's steps. Like I have a 7-step mixing workflow. And then when it comes to editing, talking about, okay, here's what to do first in drum editing: step 1, step 2, step 3. Same with vocal tuning. What should you do first? Should you look at fixing the timing? Should you fix the tuning first, etc.? And then with tracking, it's again step by step. Like, what do you do first when you're going to track drums? Well, it's okay. Let's make sure we have the right sizes of drums. Let's replace the heads. Let's tune them. Now let's put the kit together. Let's mic it up. Everything very broken down step by step, but not just in like a boring kind of classroom setting where I'm just telling you what to do. It's all just fly on the wall style, just watching me actually do it on real projects, which I think is one of the best ways to learn.
That's great. And I know for a lot of us, we know what it feels like to just sort of short attention span theater, just flipping around endless YouTube videos and then just feel like we really we're not any closer to getting something done. So it's great to have it broken down like that. Very cool. Now I know you have a resource for us called the Full Stack Producer series, and Rockstars, I've got a link in the show notes for you. If you just go to rsrockstars.com/fullstack, that's going to take you right to that, and you can go now. You've got some videos coming out for us, Jordan. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's a totally free experience. It's called the Full Stack Producer. The videos are being released September 28th. It's a 3-part video series, and it's going to be kind of Netflix binge style. So I'm just going to release it all at once on that day, and then you can do it all at once if you want. You can watch it multiple times, but it's all about how to make competitive records today and exposing like what actually separates the best producers and mixers from everyone else. And it's really meant to just give you that blueprint, show you, if you actually want to become a paid professional in the studio, if you want to release music that hits that pro caliber, that stands up beside your favorite records, well, this is the blueprint of what is required to get there. So that's a 3-part video series. We've got a free ebook to download to go along with it. We've got assessments. You can kind of discover where you are, like how close or how far you are and what to do next to move ahead. I'm going to be doing a couple bonus live stream trainings to dive more into some of the digital tools like program drums and amp sims, and also talk more about how to mix faster, more confidently. So it's just going to be about 2 weeks of just really intense, hands-on, a free experience for people to go through and come out with just much more clarity of where they are and what they need to do to begin hitting that pro bar.
That's awesome, man. Well, that's exciting. So Rockstars, again, I got the link in the show notes of this episode. So just click through rsrockstars.com/fullstack, and that'll take you to it. So if the videos are coming out soon, it'll just let you register for that so that you get the announcement when they come out, and you can start jumping in on all this free stuff. So that's very cool, man.
Yeah, and even though if you join early and sign up early, we've got stuff set up there. You can download the ebook, the companion ebook, right away, and we've got some other free PDF downloads and an assessment you can take. So there's already stuff you can dive in with now, and then the videos drop and the live streams start happening September 28th. That's
awesome. Well, I know you've got a lot of wonderful testimonials from people that you've worked with and taught this stuff too, and they talk about real transformations from before and after, stuff that just sounds like a demo, that everything in an afternoon demo rough mix to something that sounds really, really polished and finished. And one of the questions I would have for you regarding what you do over at Hardcore Music Studio too for the Rockstars is, I know one of the challenges is just feeling really isolated now with trying to make music. So do you include sort of a community aspect? Is there a chance to be able to, bounce ideas off other people and really join into the group that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of this Full Stack Producer, the free experience, we're going to have a kind of special pop-up Facebook group. That's where I'll be doing the live trainings, but there will be probably thousands of engineers around the world in there. Last time we ran this, we had people asking for mix critiques. I jumped in there, giving feedback on mixes, and everyone was helping each other out. And then of course for my paid students of the Pro Production System and other courses, we have a private community, which is it's so valuable, and it's got nothing to do with me either. It's all the people in that group who help each other out, answer questions every day, give constructive mixed feedback that is not just tearing people down. So there's plenty of opportunity for that.
Yeah. What are are there any sort of really common pain points that you hear people talking about and they really appreciate that community aspect for?
Yeah, I think that what I've been told by a lot of our members is that in other communities online, they're just kind of afraid to ask for feedback on their work because they either have received negative feedback or have just seen it happen in the group where people just use it as an excuse to make themselves look better and kind of like tear other people down versus being constructive in a positive way, right? I think a lot of communities can just become a few people who are just kind of acting like know-it-alls and kind of just making everyone else feel ashamed for not being as cool as they are, right? And I'm happy that we don't have that kind of vibe at all in the group. It's a lot of the members say it's the most positive, supportive community that they've been a part of.
That's awesome. That's our goal at Recording Studio Rockstars too. So no question is ever too dumb. And if this isn't a place for you to be able to make a better record, no matter where you are, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So very cool. So all right, closing question here. This one's hypothetical, but I like to ask it at the end of the podcast. And we're going to take the Wayback Studio Machine. And if you, Jordan, could go back and give yourself one bit of advice and say, listen, man, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio one day, what would you go back and tell yourself? Tough question, huh?
Yeah. I'm going to have to go with get it right at the source. I think I honestly wasted, a good 4 years just trying to fix everything in the mix. And once I started trying to get it right at the source and take it seriously, not make excuses, that's when everything changed.
Groovy, man. Well, that sounds like that's definitely in alignment with everything we just talked about. Mm-hmm. Very cool. So thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. We're really excited to go check out the Full Stack Producer Series and to jump in on all this awesome free training you're going to be doing. And Rockstars, please remember, go to rsrockstars.com/fullstack, and that'll take you right to the registration. And any other closing words?
Well, I'm excited to have everyone jump in there and enjoy these videos and hopefully learn a lot and come away just with so much more clarity and some actual techniques they can implement. But yeah, excited to see you guys there.
Awesome, dude. Thanks so much, Jordan.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon, dude. Cheers.
All right.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.